Thank you, Tanya. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to share the stage with you and to follow on from that. Apart from anything with the snow down to sea level in Hobart for the first time in 30 years this week, all week, you've made me feel right at home seeing some of those slides. And John, thank you for the kind introduction as well and generous introduction. I prefer to introduce myself this way. My 11-year-old son, Hon Bartlett, who will feature later in this talk as well, is telling his dad he wants to go to town, catch the bus by himself to the city so he can go to JB Hi-Fi and EB Games and buy his Xbox stuff. So I said to him the other day, well, Hudson, if you're going to catch the bus by yourself, you have to use Google Street View to walk the streets of Hobart so you understand where the bus station is and where all those things are. And the other night he was doing this a few weeks back and he yelled out to me, Dad, come and see this. He says, you know you've made it, Dad, when you've made it to Google Street View. Now anyone who knows Hobart will know this is the sort of main drag, Davey Street, and the yellow building on the left is the sort of state government offices where my office on the 11th floor as Premier used to be. So it's a very familiar scene to me, but you may not be able to read it at the back. But captured by Google Street View is this fella walking along Davey Street with a sign that says, Vote Bartlett last. So my son decided to take a screen grab of this and email it to me because he thought this was about the best thing he'd ever seen on the interwebs. So by way of introduction, and that brings me to here, that's me. When I became a backbencher in the Tasmanian State Parliament in 2002, I'd been a CIO, a sort of failed .com entrepreneur, and I became very obsessed about finding new ways of having a conversation with my constituents using technology. I was kind of sick of going to these style of meetings, and anyone in government who's involved in community engagement in any sort of way knows exactly what this cartoon, I don't have a question per se, it's more of a 15-minute incoherent ramble, knows the life of a sad backbencher serving his electorate. Of course, also on my journey, I created in 2002 a website which I think tapping into the suspicion that politicians are actually lazy and do nothing, I created a website in 2002 that published my entire diary, enabled people to like things and friend me. What I really have discovered subsequently, of course, is I should have just left politics there and created Facebook. But it was a monumental failure, this website. I letterboxed my entire electorate and said to them, ever wondered what your local member does with all his time? Well, now you can find out. And I published my diary online. I discovered 6 months later that really the only user was my mother, working out whether I was in her suburb and hadn't come to visit her or not. It was a monumental failure, but of course, fast forward 6 or so years, and I found myself as Premier of the great Australian state of Tasmania, with 12,000 friends on Facebook, all with the caps lock key somehow fixated on, telling me what they thought of me, largely from the backdrop of anonymity. And I guess it was these sort of formative things that brings me really, or thinking, that brings me to today and my current obsession, I suppose, that ubiquitous connectivity, and in fact, just beautifully and eloquently described by Tanya, ubiquitous connectivity, the fact that we are all connected to one of these things, is massively disrupting the way we create wealth, the way we communicate with our customers, and for customers you can insert the word stakeholder, client, patient, student, constituent, ratepayer, whatever word you want to use, and massively changing in unexpected ways the way we can solve old public policy problems, the old and wicked public policy problems, perhaps. Now, people will recognise this photo, perhaps. It's taken in exactly the same place in the Vatican. 2005, of course, the election of Pope Benedict. A short 8 years later, the election of the current Pope, Pope Francis. I like the guy in the top shot in the bottom right-hand corner with his little flip phone Motorola, really trying desperately to get that shot. But I guess to me, ubiquity or ubiquitous connectivity is best described in images The fact, in fact, that there are more people on the planet today that will put a smartphone in their back pocket than people who will put a toothbrush in their mouth, which makes everyone in the room go, there. Or this, in the very short reign of one pope, the world changed massively. And I think it's down to government, particularly in this case, to learn both from citizens, but also changing business models that are extraordinary new ways of creating wealth to better serve citizens in the way we co-construct solutions both in service delivery and policy making. We've heard a brilliant example of it exactly today. This is the gratuitous shot, because I can't talk about Hudson Bartlett without talking about Matilda Bartlett. This is my 9-year-old daughter doing an aeroplane ride on Dad under the Eiffel Tower last September. Took my kids for the first time to Europe, of course. First time in the Northern Hemisphere, in fact, for my children. Of course, when we were preparing for this trip, we had to study, think about where we were going to go, get the kids engaged. Some 12 years prior was the last trip as a tourist I'd done to Europe. I'd been there for work since. But as a tourist, and I know it was 12 years ago because we had no kids and it was the most magnificent trip, she says wistfully. Of course, when we planned for that trip though, what did my future wife and I do? We went out and bought the Lonely Planet Guide, the Tablet of Stone, the massive book, and we cut out Estonia and a couple of other countries we weren't going to go to save weight in the backpack. It was the Tablet of Stone that directed us where to eat, where to sleep, where to shop, what to see, how to get there, and so on. From a single voice, with a single point of view, in a single volume, a Tablet of Stone. Of course, what did we do this time? We used TripAdvisor. Now, TripAdvisor is completely unlike Lonely Planet, or that original Tablet of Stone, in that it's a marketplace, a highly efficient marketplace, a platform, and hence the title of my talk, Government as a Platform, a platform on which people like me who want information about travelling in Europe can share with people, others who have knowledge about tourism in Europe. And we can get together and co-construct the solutions to my travel problems effectively. My thesis to you today, or my assertion to you today, and what I'd most like you to leave thinking about, is that I believe in Australia and New Zealand, governments need to behave a lot less like Lonely Planet and behave a lot more like TripAdvisor. Less of expertise, policy handed down as tablets of stone, and more of what we've heard very well described in Finland, of co-construction, government providing the platform on which our citizens, participants, experts and non-experts alike can co-contribute. Of course, all around Europe we used Uber to get. What's Uber? A very efficient online marketplace to get people together who have a car, who want to ride. We booked into Airbnbs. What's Airbnb? A very efficient marketplace in which people with a room can get together with people who want a room. Now, we've seen this platform disruption in the commercial world emerge in the very short reign of one pope, if you like, and it has totally disrupted the way business models work around the planet. And I believe it's totally disrupting the way, and largely what this conference is all about, the way government needs to work in the future. I put up this slide because the seemingly undisruptible model of selling pizzas, that is, Dad's tired on a Friday night, rings the pizza delivery guy, I'll have a half Aussie, half Hawaiian. You probably don't know what those are, Tanya. And probably half is about the only innovation we've ever seen in the pizza market for the last sort of 30 or 40 years. 45 minutes later, ding dong, the pizza arrives at the door. Now, of course, what Domino's Pizza have done in Australia, and I encourage you to go and look, and I encourage you to look up the hashtag Hudson Pizza, is create a marketplace in which my 11-year-old son can construct his own pizzas. So first of all, allowing him to determine the service he gets from the pizza delivery shop. But more importantly, what Domino's has done is it allowed Hudson to develop all of his own pizzas and put them in the Domino's store for people to buy. Now every time, and I like to put the hashtag up, because every time someone buys one of Hudson's pizzas from the Domino's store, he gets $1 in his account. So please augment his pocket money from Dad's pocket by buying his pizza. Shameless self-promotion ad. But what has Don Mage, the CEO of Domino's, done? Apart from, by the way, raise the Domino's share price by 54%, and in the first week of releasing this app, do 27% of all of their annual revenue in 7 days, he has created a marketplace in which kids and people around Australia can co-construct the product. He can sack all his pizza designers, all the experts, and he can also, of course, get rid of all his market research, because the market is co-constructing the market research along the way. Not unlike how what we've heard from Finland, but in a much more simplistic way. I think this, I guess, to draw out of those platform approach, I want to analyse what's going on in that in the commercial sector. And then I'll switch my attention to how do we apply this to government. Essentially, since the agrarian revolution, or maybe the industrial revolution, there's been one business model on the planet to make profit. You make product, you sell it to customers, you do some sort of innovation, new price, new widget, new colour, new whatever, new Aussie Hawaiian, half. You make more product and you sell it to customers. Innovation might include some market research and other things. But the way these platforms as a business model are emerging has completely disrupted that business model. And large amounts of wealth creation are being destroyed, ways we used to create wealth, and significant new models for creating wealth are emerging. And this is what they look like. Products are becoming services. So in the pizza business, we are able to create a much more personalised service. But the really mature models, services are becoming marketplaces. And it's in those marketplaces or those platforms that the value lies, because those platforms engage the crowd, both experts and non-experts alike, in co-constructing the actual product. Think Uber, think Airbnb, think TripAdvisor, think Domino's Pizza. In fact, 80% of the top 100 companies in Silicon Valley, 80% of those value in those companies is now in platforms, not in services and products. And the TripAdvisor / Lonely Planet story is that Lonely Planet, of course, in about the time the Pope changed in 2005, was sold to BBC for £600 million. I've got a dollar sign there, I know, but it's pounds. BBC subsequently, about the time the Pope changed again, sold Lonely Planet for £45 million. That's how much value was stripped out of the Lonely Planet tablet of stone, highly productised single voice model and distributed to the marketplace platform model. Now, I know in government value and profit and for-profit is a complex thing to get our heads around sometimes. But if that much value was stripped out of a commercial entity because of that, I wonder how much value, and you can apply whatever meaning to that word you want, is being stripped out of government in its response to what citizens want. Increasingly, I gave a TEDx talk, you can go and look it up on YouTube if you're interested. It was titled this: "A digitally empowered, ubiquitously connected community is smarter than 1,000 policy wonks." I don't know, maybe we've got about 300 policy wonks in the room today, I'm not sure. I don't want to offer offence, but after I gave this TEDx talk and it was posted online, I got a 3-page dissertation from my friend and then Secretary of Department of Premier and Cabinet in Tasmania, telling me why I was wrong. Now, this implied 2 things, by the way. 1 was he thought I was wrong. 2 was the government was in caretaker mode, so he had time to write a 3-page dissertation to me on why I was wrong. But I think he was wrong. And I guess my argument to you is that, and we've heard it beautifully laid out by Tanya, is that there is a role for experts in government as a platform, but there's a much more significant role for, if you like, the non-expert population in creating, co-creating solutions. So I just want to tell a couple of stories now that hopefully augment the stories you've heard from Tanya, that give you a sense that crowdsourcing, hopefully it gives you a sense that crowdsourcing can be both active, that is, we saw our friend in the red coat out in the snow who actively is participating in the co-construction of policy solutions, or it can also be passive, and we need to think about some of these models. And I'll give you this example. So when I was Premier, the head of public health in Tasmania, Dr. Roscoe Taylor, came to see me and he said, swine flu, Premier. It's coming out of Mexico City, it's going to spread into Tasmania. Well, you need to sign a cheque for $1 million to roll out 32 swine flu clinics across the state, and people in white coats will wait for the onslaught of swine flu and people to arrive. Now, it turns out swine flu 1 was reasonably innocuous. Doesn't mean swine flu 2 is going to be. I said to him, I recall, it was in 2008, how will we know where it's going to spread? Can we, tactically deploy resources to respond to it? And he said, no, we won't know. Turns out he was wrong, because some University of Otago research, friends in New Zealand, it shows from their research that, I've got this cough, I've heard of this swine flu thing, I type swine flu into Google, into Dr. Google to find out. If you geolocate all of those searches, aggregate up all of that data, it is a nearly perfect 24-hour in advance predictor of how swine flu spread out of Mexico City into Australia down to suburb and almost down to street level. Now, this is crowdsourcing, but this is passive crowdsourcing, or actually it's using the vast tracts of searchable, findable troves of data that are being actively and passively created because we've all got one of these, because of ubiquitous connectivity. Similarly, but also slightly differently, in the city of Greater Boston, realised the cyclists were complaining about the state of the cycleways, the bumps, if you like, the potholes. Now, what would normally happen in a city would go out and send some officers out to check out where the bumps are, put some spray paint around them, the truck would come along later on. Instead, the City of Boston wrote a $5,000 smartphone app and encouraged their cycling community that if you want better cycleways, so there's a empowering impact currency here, that is, you want something, we ask you to do this, and impact currencies in this space, what Bill Eggers would call, are extremely important, and said to them, every time you go for a ride, if you want better cycleways, switch on this app, put the phone in the back of the Lycra or whatever you do, and if you see the data up the side, we'll collect non-personalised and anonymised, if you like, data. Because of that, the City of Boston has a up to the second picture of every single bump or pothole in 3,500 kilometres of cycleways across the whole city. But not only do they have that, they have a longitudinal study, because they're keeping the data over time of how those potholes are eroding or improving. These days, I'm sort of a tourist attraction almost. I've got a little shack down on Pirates Bay near Dewtown, and got a big red canoe, and got featured in The Australian a couple of years ago. And now when the tourist boats go out to spot the orca whales and all of those sorts of things, you can often hear them when I'm fishing out of my big red canoe. And on the right, you'll see the former Premier of Tasmania fishing today again, blah, blah, give him a wave. So I've sort of become this quirky, recreational fisherman in my own home state. But one of the things I love doing, well, I don't love it because it suggests climate change is having a big impact on my home state, because the waters are warming down the east coast of Tasmania. We're getting a lot of odd species that arrive in my bay. And I'm catching these fish I've never seen before. I've been fishing since I was a boy in that bay, and I've never seen these fish before. But RedMap allows me to log that fish, geolocate it, and post it basically on this platform. It allows the CSIRO and IMAS scientists to get to then, in fact, individually, again, impact currency, tell me what the fish is, when it was last caught, how many around this area were caught. They get the data because recreational fishermen like me all over, or fisher people I should say, all over Tasmania are snapping their invasive species, if you like. So they get vast troves of data without ever sending another CSIRO boat out. We as recreational fishermen, of course, get our catch on the board, which is the impact currency we like. particularly when I take the photo up really close to make it look really big. This is another platform on which we are co-creating solutions to old and wicked public policy problems. The more people use technology, and again, this is one of the things I really want to leave you, as consumers, and for the first time in history, consumers are ahead of our major institutions, including government, including universities, in their use of technology because of the power of this thing, and the power of the Fitbit and the Apple Watch and all the other wearable and ingestible devices that are coming along. More people use technology, the more they expect technology to shape their experience as citizens. And traditionally, we find that very hard as government to deal with, I think. About 2 years ago in Tasmania, some fires swept through. My father lives 400 kilometres west of Brisbane in the Lockyer Valley. So as my shack was under threat from fire, my father's house was under flood for the third time in 4 years. So this always reminds me of Dorothy McKellar's great and iconic Australian poem. I'd like to recite it for you, Tanya, but maybe later on. I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains. But for the first time in history, during that event, I got better, more accurate, richer information from Twitter than I did from the traditional media. Much more accurate about both unfolding disasters, or natural disasters. When the fire front had gone through, within about an hour or so, and you may have heard this story because it was featured on Australian Story, a young woman by the name of Mel Irons, a friend of mine, 150 kilometres away from the fire front in her flat in suburban Hobart, said, I've got to do something to help these poor people. So she set up a Facebook page called Tassie Fires, We Can Help. Within 3 days, there were 35,000 interactions on this very simple Facebook page. Now, normally what happens, and in my household these days, now that I'm not in government, if a light globe blows in the bathroom, I say my wife and I go, what's the government doing about that anyway? Most Australians, and New Zealanders no doubt, 5, yes, thank you. I was expecting the ringing the bell because I got a more Pavlovian response to the ringing the bell. Oh, it must be a vote on in the house. I've lost my train now. See, it's Pavlovian, isn't it? You see, the Facebook. Normally, of course, after a disaster like that, citizens turn directly to government and say, "What are you doing to help us?" You know, this is our needs. But instead, this marketplace, this platform on Facebook of all things, sprung up. And there were whole flotillas of 1,000 boats organised to come out of Hobart and take supplies down to the peninsula, which was cut off by fire, basically. There were stories of the entire Australian oyster industry saved because 70% of the oyster spats in the industry are created in one place in Dunalley. The power had gone, no generator, put it up on this Facebook page. 6 generators arrived in 1 hour to save the entire Australian oyster industry. Now, this is a marketplace, this is a platform that government could never have replicated by the old Lonely Planet approach, only by the TripAdvisor approach. So I was very surprised 2 weeks later when the local News Limited paper, that shall not be named, presented a front page, government's doing nothing for the citizens of Dunalley and beyond. So I rang up my friend who was in the Department of Premier and Cabinet who was running the fire response. This was post my time as Premier. And I said, what is going on? There's this whole platform of people, a marketplace solving their own problems. Why isn't government interacting with that? And she said, oh, well, we have a no Facebook policy in Premier and Cabinet, of course, which actually I set, so there you go. But the point of the story is this, because then the then Premier, my successor, Lara Ginnings, decided she did want to interact with this marketplace. So what did she do? She wrote a press release on Tasmanian government letterhead and posted it on the Facebook page, to which she got about 30,000 flames because the other thing about not only government as a platform, what government needs to understand is that not only we're not the experts anymore, and actually we need to create the platform on which experts and non-experts can co-create solutions in service and policy. We also need to recognise we are now a participant in that marketplace, not sticking the Lonely Planet on top of the TripAdvisor. It doesn't work. We have to be an authentic participant in that marketplace. And that's why it's lovely to hear that finished story, because that is government being an authentic participant in the marketplace of co-construction. And that's really, I guess, largely the end of my argument. But we see this in commercial sector. The growth of investment in the valley in civic tech is what the Americans call it, is massive. And I won't go into this slide because I'm out of time, but I'm happy to provide the slides afterwards. We need, and I declare an interest here, I'm a director of a Canadian company called PlaceSpeak, founded by the former Premier of British Columbia, former Mayor of Vancouver, Mike Harcourt, because he recognised some of these problems post his premiership as well. We need to shift from the old idea that we've got an issue we want to consult the community on, so we stand up a single website and we say, here's the information, come and give us our feedback, to a much more citizen-centric approach where there is a ubiquitous utility-like consultation, engagement platform which is citizen-centric, that allows me to say, I'm interested in forestry issues, I'm interested in legislation about off-road motor vehicles, and I'm interested in civic issues or neighbourhood issues in my area. Tell me what's going on and I'll interact that way. And that's the way we need to go. It's the PlaceSpeak model that I'm involved with. I'll end on this then. Government has a lot of challenges in this space. This is what the world used to look like. Roughly even, triangle between incumbents, think taxis, think pizza, what have you. Innovators, half Aussie, half Hawaiian. Regulators, that is the marketplace in which we sell this stuff, and government really is at the top bit there. But this is what the world looks like now. The innovators, pushed by the consumers armed with their mobile devices, are stretching that triangle out in favour of platform wealth creation, value creation. Think in this triangle, incumbents taxi industry, regulators, Department of Roads and Transport, innovators, Uber. The consumers and the workers are massively driving these changes. We haven't, I think, as government, got our heads around this new regulatory environment, let alone around the environment in which we need to be the innovators in government, service delivery and policy. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.